A new law aims to protect domestic violence victims by preventing their abusers from buying guns. Federal law actually bans anyone convicted of a domestic violence-related crime, a misdemeanor, from buying a firearm. But a new law signed by Governor Cuomo yesterday will require that judges determine whether a crime is actually considered an act of domestic violence. And if it is, the information will then be passed on to the federal government to ensure that the conviction shows up in a background check of the defendant if that individual tries to buy a firearm. My next guest was the Assembly sponsor of the bill. Assemblywoman Amy Paulin is joining us from New York City tonight. Assemblywoman, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So this is actually a little bit confusing. It's not as straightforward. If you have a conviction, you therefore cannot buy a gun. So how does it work?
Well, the federal law, which has been in existence for quite a while, says that if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence crime, you cannot buy a firearm, as you eloquently described earlier. The problem is, what does that mean as it translates into New York state law? You know, what is a domestic violence misdemeanor?
Mm-hmm.
There was no such, there's no definition like that in our penal code. So we had to look at what the FBI considered, you know, reading the federal statute. How did they interpret this? And then how can we give them the appropriate people for the to make sure they don't have that they don't buy firearms. And there were three. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please continue, and then I'll ask you. Go ahead.
Sure. There were three elements. One is it a misdemeanor? Two, was there an element of force? Mm-hmm. And three, was there an appropriate relationship as defined in the federal statute? Right. So we had to figure out how we were going to do that. And the approach, and frankly, this law has been taking me an embarrassingly long time to figure out because it was complicated. We were in touch with the FBI. The FBI went through our penal code with my office. We figured out which among the the misdemeanors they would consider that fit their definition, so which ones had an element of force, and we went back and forth about which ones they should be.
Assemblywoman, let me ask you this. First of all, I know that this grew out of a particular tragedy, right? This grew out of an incident that happened in Poughkeepsie. Is that correct? No. Okay.
I mean, I would like, this really grew out of, before I came into the Assembly, I had been the executive director of an agency called My Sister's Place, a domestic violence agency,
right,
and was well aware of the federal statute.
I see.
And it became my mission to develop a New York state law to comply with that federal. What, unfortunately, you know, that tragedy brought home something we know that happens in domestic violence all the time, which is that gun violence is the preferred use of force. Guns are used to threaten, guns are used to kill, and it's, you know, we know we have to prevent abusers from getting them.
Okay, I see.
What this did was it highlighted that, and it also gave us the momentum to pass it in both the Assembly and the Senate.
I see, okay. Just to be clear, though, what we're talking about there was the death of Jessica Welch and Officer John Falcone. That was what we were speaking of right there, in case viewers
absolutely,
didn't recall.
And unfortunately, without that tragedy, we likely would not have been successful this year in making it a law.
I see. Can we maybe speak of a hypothetical? Because I think that this is very confusing. It sounds to me that the judge in New York has a lot of discretionary power, which is unusual because, for example, in drug cases, there's a big complaint among advocates that judges don't have a lot of discretion. So in this case, though, it seems like they will.
They will be responsible at time of sentencing for making a finding for that third element, which is the definition of relationship. So if someone's convicted of one of the crimes that the FBI has acknowledged is one that fits their definition of misdemeanor with an element of force.
And what would that be specifically?
It could be an aggravated assault. You know, there's serious physical injury, you know, throwing someone down a flight of stairs and creating an injury which we would all think is clearly, if an abuser was doing that, would be domestic violence. So there's, a series of misdemeanors that would classify in this case. And if that was true, then the third and last element is there a relationship as defined by federal law, which is very expansive, but it isn't exactly New York's definition. So then the judge would have to make a finding to that effect at sentencing, and then all three elements would go into the database.
Will it apply to people who are not married and to people who might actually be same-sex partners?
It would, both instances. Where it wouldn't apply, where New York has a broader law, is for dating couples that are not cohabitating. So if a couple is cohabitating, then no matter whether they're same-sex or married, they would be included in the federal definition.
And of course, it's
unfortunate.
This does not, right? I mean, obviously there's a broad spectrum of people who are together in any number of ways. This also only, unfortunately, can apply to people who obtain guns legally. Obviously, the idea of people obtaining a firearm illegally is not something that you're able to control with this legislation.
Absolutely, but again, this is, long arms don't require a permit,
right?
Except for in New York City. So outside of New York City, anybody could walk into a gun shop and buy a long arm, and often do, and then they can be used potentially to hurt a potential victim. So we know that this is happening all the time, and we expect this to cut down on those instances.
Well, obviously, this goes into effect, I believe, in 30 days after signing?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Okay, so it will be 30 days from yesterday. The governor actually announced that he would sign it. And Assemblywoman, I know you've been pushing for this for quite some time, so congratulations.
Well, thank you. We're very happy that it's gotten this far and that it's going to be law.
Thanks very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.